Notice that many of you are struggling with the rendering of eyes, noses, and lips. So let me give you a little bit more information about that topic. Let's start off by rendering an eyeball. One of the first things I do before I draw an eye is to draw a little spherical shape like this. That's going to help me place my eyelids, because we know the eyelids are thin flaps of skin that wrap around the spherical shape of the eye. Then I'm going to start wrapping my eyelids around. So if you want more information about how to get exactly the right curvature, look at the construction of the eye. So we're only talking about shading today. Here is the lower eyelid this way. I'm going to really lightly indicate the shape of the tear duct here like this. Most importantly, at this stage, and really at every stage, try to avoid really sharp lines. Try to avoid being linear. So let me get the shape of the upper eyelid a little bit. It's going this way. Notice I'm using the side of my pencil. I'm keeping my lines very, very, very light. And then here's the shape of the bottom part of the lower eyelid. Let me indicate the iris going this way. Okay, so now that I have the shape indicated, I'm going to start shading my eye. Again, try to avoid putting in sharp lines. So what I am going to do is throw a little shadow underneath the upper eyelid like this. Here I'm going to indicate a little bit of the thickness, the fact that the eyelid is pushing forward. And then here I'm going to throw a little bit of shadow underneath the top plane of the lower eyelid. So I'm going to shade this little area a little bit. There's a little bit of shadow here, and maybe a little bit more shadow on this side. Notice I'm trying to avoid any kind of sharp details. One of the worst things you can do when drawing an eye is to do something like this. Doing this, no matter how well it's shaded, is going to make the eye feel really flat and graphic looking. So try to avoid sharp lines. Make sure that you're drawing only with shadow. So there's a little bit of, I would say more halftone than shadow, underneath the brow here. Okay, and since I'm using charcoal reduction, I can blend this down a little bit just to soften it, and also start erasing out using my kneaded eraser. So let's take a little piece of kneaded eraser here, and let's start erasing out a little bit of the light hitting the top eyelid. I see that there's a little bit of light hitting here, like this. And then I'm going to use my eraser holder to indicate the fact that light is hitting the top plane of the lower eyelid. Like this. This way. And then I can start erasing out the white of the eye. Now, keep in mind that the white of the eye is going to be brighter here, and then as it's going inside the eye socket, it gets a little bit darker. So don't erase the white of the eye all the way bright. It's number one, it's sitting inside the brows, behind eyelids. It's not going to be that bright a value. And then make sure that the value transitions. So it actually looks like the eye is round. Don't put a flat value here. All right, now I'm going to start going in and putting in some of the darks in the pupil and the iris itself. Now, one little trick to get the eye to look like it's glassy, transparent, is to make sure that the area around the highlight is going a little bit darker. So we have a highlight here going this way. the area around the highlight is going to be a little bit darker. And then light hits the iris at the highlight and then shows up here. So it actually makes the opposite edge of the eye a little bit lighter, like this. I'll blend this down a little bit. Usually I use a blending stump, I just don't have one at hand right at this moment. Okay, so let's start going a little bit darker. And maybe throwing a little bit more shadow right along the edge of the lower eyelid here. A little more shadow here. Be very, very selective where you put your lines. So there's a faint little line here, like this. Here, between the eyeball and the tear duct is not a line, it's a value transition. See, I'm keeping things very, very soft. That's really the secret, right? Some of you guys are putting in lines that are just way too strong, and they make your drawing really flat and, once again, graphic looking. Okay, so now we can start erasing out our highlights. Here's the highlight for the eye here. We've got a little highlight here, like this. We have a little highlight here, like this, right along the edge of the lower eyelid. A little highlight here, and a little highlight in the tear duct. There's a few other ones too. Sometimes, if the eye is very, very wet, there's going to be a little highlight where the tears collect under the bottom of the eye here. Let's start pushing the contrast a little bit. Now, this eye is drawn as if you're looking really close to it. So the only time I would draw an eye like this is if I'm really, really close to the model and I can see all of these details. If you can't see this detail, don't draw it. Don't draw it. Only draw as much detail as you can actually see. Let's go a little tiny bit darker, try to get a full range of value here. Okay, so now you might ask, well, where are the eyelashes? What has he done with them? What happened to this poor model that her eyelashes are completely missing? Well, here's my advice to you. Do not draw individual lashes. Instead, suggest a presence by drawing a fuzzy, dark, almost like a shadow, right along the upper eyelid here. And then for the lower eyelid, do not draw lashes at all. Just ignore them. So to get the sense of lash, I'm going to start building up my value here a little bit, like this. That gives you a suggestion that the lashes are there, and ends up, from a distance, looking more realistic than if you actually rendered out every single individual lash. So sometimes you see on, I guess on Instagram, you see these kinds of tricks where artists are drawing individual lashes. Okay, not to trash other people's art, but it actually looks pretty bad. Look, unless you're really up close to somebody, you're not going to see individual lashes. And once again, sometimes by suggesting detail, you get a more realistic effect than if you try to render out every single lash. So, unless you're making a video for Instagram where drawings of eyes with really strong eyelashes are really popular, I would avoid drawing lashes. And again, for the bottom lash, you can introduce a little bit of a darker value here, like this. And that's going to give you a sense, give the viewer a sense that there are actually lashes there. What else? Look, in this particular model, I have a photo of her eye really up close. I can see reflections, so sometimes you'll see, mountains reflected in the eye. I wouldn't bother doing that either. So Again, suggest detail rather than, I would say, over-render the eye. Okay, what else can I tell you? All right, well, look, sometimes you're really far away. You have an entire figure and the eye is really small. So I'm doing a drawing that's maybe this big, like this. We're obviously not going to draw an eye that looks like this on a head this size. That'd be pretty silly of us, I think. So in this case, where the eye is really far away, you're going to reduce down your details into blobs of light and dark. So here's an eyeball. I start off with a shape. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw a little bit of value underneath the upper eyelid, a little bit of value underneath the lower eyelid like this. I'm going to go a little bit darker to indicate the presence of a tear duct like this. The fact that there's usually a shadow underneath the brow here, like that. Here's the iris. Then I might erase out, look, it depends how big the drawing is or how much time I have. I might erase out a little bit of detail here and there. But from a distance, that actually ends up looking like a more realistic eye than something like this. And then sometimes, if the eye is really far away, it might just be a question of doing something like this. So particularly on a figure this big, probably something like that might be enough indication of an eye. Alright, so that's my advice on how to render eyes. Basically keep lines out of them. Don't draw eyelashes. And then when things get really, really far away, reduce the details down to blobs of light and dark. You'll find that from a distance, the viewer connects the dots, completes the details that you left out, and sometimes suggesting details ends up looking more realistic than something that is really, really sharp and fully rendered with every single reflection. There's heads back here, baseball caps, all that kind of stuff. It ends up looking really hard, really stiff, and ultimately kind of fake. Alright, so that's eyes. Now let's talk about noses. Now let's talk about how to draw noses. We have a nose in front of me here. One of the most important things to think about when drawing noses is the fact that the nose is a wedge shape that looks like this. That's three-quarter view. From the front, you're going to see a shape that looks like this. Let's make it a little bit darker so you guys can see it. So kind of downward tilted nose, right? Looking from the bottom, you might see a shape that looks roughly like this. Let's give it a little bit more tilt this way. Why is that important to keep in mind? Because you want to remember that you're dealing with here 2 distinct planes, or 3 distinct planes, 2 side planes and a top plane, or a top plane and a side plane and a bottom plane. You want to make sure that you're always showing distinction between the different planes of the nose. How do you show distinction? With value. You'll never have differently facing planes with the same value on them. So for instance, a nose like this, even if it's perfectly evenly lit, is going to have slightly darker values on the side of the nose and a brighter value hitting the top. Or in the case of something like this, you might have a bottom plane that's entirely in shadow, a side plane that is in halftone, and the top plane which is fully lit. In this kind of three-quarter view, we have, in this case, this side of the nose lit up a little bit brighter, this part of the nose, the top plane of the nose, in full light, and then this part of the nose, this plane, as it's turning, starting to go into shadow. So let me quickly sketch in the nostril, going this way. Notice I'm using the side of the pencil. I'm trying to avoid sharp lines as much as possible. So here we have a little rounded tip going this way, like this. The nose is not perfectly straight. We have a little bit of curvature here. Again, I'm using the side of my pencil, and then I see a little bit of nostril peeking out from the back here, like this. Be very, very selective about where you put lines. In fact, at the beginning, when you're sketching in the nose, don't put any lines at all. So, the biggest mistake you can make, once again, you can see how I made a mistake here in the eye by putting in sharp lines, is doing the same thing for the nose. So instead of being really soft at the beginning, doing this. If you have sharp lines like this, your nose will never be three-dimensional. Why? Because sharp lines push forward. They look close. Which means if you have a sharp line here, it's going to end up looking closer than the meeting of the planes here, and it's going to have a flattening effect. So noses with sharp lines along the edge in three-quarter view look like noses in profile. And look, even in profile, you don't want to put a sharp line there either, but try to avoid doing it in three-quarter view. So keep the edge really, really soft here, like this. Find your light breaks. So we have a light break running here, and actually most of the nose here on this side. It's going to be in shadow. I'm going to knock this down a little bit, and I'm going to start erasing. So what am I looking for? I'm looking for the fact that the value here on this side of the nose is a little bit brighter than the value here. The value here is a little brighter than the value here. Less lines you put in, the more you're drawing with value, the more realistic the effect is going to be. Now, once again, there are a few lines in the eye and in the nose as well, so maybe, just maybe, you can use a little bit of a crispier line to separate the bottom of the nose from the area above the upper lip. Maybe here I'll go a little bit darker. Here I'm going to try to keep it relatively soft. I'm going to put in a few lines here and there. Mostly I'm going to try to avoid them. Alright, now let's get our eraser holder and erase out a few highlights. So we have a highlight where the side plane meets the front plane here. It's going a little brighter. Like this. We have a really bright, sharp highlight on the tip of the nose here. Like this. And then a little highlight here. A little highlight here. And there's your nose. Maybe this could use a little bit of brighter highlight, but that looks about right. Again, the only real trick, the only key secret is not to put a sharp line right here or here, for instance. To always, always, always be selective about where you put your sharper details. Less sharp lines, the more realistic the effect. Now let's deal with the mouth. Let me put a mouth in front of me. Alright, so once again, just like the nose, the eyes, when you're rendering the mouth, try to avoid putting sharp lines to indicate the distinction between the upper lip and the upper mouth, lower lip and the lower part of the mouth. Use the side of your pencil as much as possible to draw the shape. Let's go to mouth in 3/4 view so we have a little bit more of a curve on this side. Again, check out the construction video, how to construct eyes, noses, and mouths for more detail on this. Alright, let's shade this thing. I'm going to throw a little shadow underneath the upper lip here to indicate not only the fact that the skin tone is a little bit darker, but also there's a shift in plane. Right? So we have light hitting this way, this part of the mouth is lit up, and then this part's going to be in halftone. And then the lower lip is going to have a little bit of light in it and a little halftone underneath. So as much as possible, do your drawing with the side of your pencil. Basically draw with fuzz, draw with shading. So we're going to indicate a little bit of the fold here, build up the value little by little. Now, I can put in a line here. This is okay where the lips are touching. But again, be selective. It's not one long line. There's some places where the line is a little more visible. Let's say here, and then here there's a little bit of a stronger line. Here, it's not going to be everywhere. So once again, just like the same mistake I'm making in the eye, the nose, if I put in a sharp line, if I do this, that's going to make my mouth look really flat and graphic. So keep lines away from your eyes, your noses, and your lips. There's a little bit more shadow here. Okay, let's rub this out a little bit. And erase out a little bit. So we have a little bit of light hitting the area directly above the upper lip here. A little bit of light hitting this little fold here, like this. And then definitely a lot more light hitting the lower lip. This way, and then a little bit of light hitting here as well. There's a little ridge along the bottom part of the lip. Let's go in and reinforce a few of these details. Treat the lines like accents, right? Little tiny touches here and there. Be very, very selective where you place your lines. Alright, now let's go in and put in a few little highlights. There's a little highlight here, like this. And this is highly dependent on how far away you are. So if you're far away, maybe you wouldn't be able to see the texture on the lower lip. I can see a little bit of it, so I'm going to put it in. A little bit more distinction between the lower lip and this part of the head. And there are your lips. So my advice, practice drawing your facial features. Fill pages and pages and pages of eyes from different angles, noses from different angles, mouths from different angles. And the best way to do that is to put a mirror in front of yourself and repeat, 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 repeat. I would say the same thing for ears as well. We're not going to get into ears, separate topic. But again, the same principle, try to avoid putting sharp lines. Practice drawing your facial features separately from the face, and then over time, these things get a lot easier to do.